10 o'clock on your Tuesday morning. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Club Hour presented by Krantz Cooling Heating. Tyler Head and Chris Clark hanging out once again with our guy Mark Benoit from the Garnet Trust. First time for 2025. We determined the other day that we're not allowed to say Happy New Year anymore because we've passed like the week. But Mark, I'll say I hope 2025 is treating you well so far. How about that?
Happy New Year, Tyler.
Okay, well, he can say it. We can't.
Yeah, we're way past that.
Way past that.
Mark,
I think you can go like through what the
we said 1 week.
First couple weeks.
We're 2 weeks in.
We're 2 weeks in.
What if you haven't seen somebody in the new year?
Maybe. Yeah.
Y'all haven't seen each
Debatable.
other.
We haven't seen each other.
I've
so,
talked to Mark.
You know what, Mark? Happy New Year. How about that? We're off to a good start.
Happy New Year.
So.
Mark still doesn't have his plaque in the studio for his most appearances award.
Yeah, we were calculating yesterday.
Updating it.
I think we're at 2,842 or something along those lines.
I don't know. I need to start getting paid more if I'm coming on here 2,000 times.
Well, I see. You guys handle that, so we'll let you handle that.
There we go.
There's been a lot going on though, Mark. In the new year and before the new year with the transfer portal, it looks like things are slowing down a lot, which is expected. I don't say that in a negative way. The portal window is closed. The exceptions being graduates who can enter at any time, and then players who have participated in the college football playoff, right? So they get the 5-day window. So I don't know how many days ago the semis were. Whatever.
We're creeping up on 5 days. I think tomorrow will be 5 days.
Yeah, tomorrow, they can enter.
Well, the Orange Bowl would have been 5 days ago.
That's
now.
Right.
So by the end of the week.
By the end of the week, those guys will be not able to enter, and then obviously you've got 2 other teams after that. So the point is, across college football, the portal activity is waning.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you've, I would expect for the winter portal, barring some super surprise, then I think the Gamecocks are done on the football side of things, and overall a very successful portal season. Filled a lot of positions of need. Obviously added some depth in some areas that I think is very important. And I think the depth piece cannot be underestimated because you look at this past year and how I think depth was a huge part of that. I mean, I think, we said sitting looking like how dominant our defensive line was. Well, a lot of it was because you had 6 guys that rotated at defensive tackle. You probably had 4 guys that could rotate at defensive end. I mean, that's 10 guys along your defensive line that you're rotating on a very regular basis. And so, I mean, you were pretty much looking at every drive on defense was a different defensive line combination that was out there. And I think that contributed a lot to what our success was. And so I think that depth on specifically in the SEC on both lines of scrimmage is very important. And I think we did a good job of adding on both sides of that piece.
Yeah, and I'd add linebacker in, you know, to what you said as well. I mean, that was a huge storyline last year. It's just really the entire front 7. You added a guy like Demetrius Knight. You brought back, the retention piece. And we'll talk about retention too, but a couple of defensive tackles in this class, 3 offensive linemen, 2 defensive backs, a running back, what else on here? Tight end, a couple corners, an edge, a quarterback. So a pretty balanced class overall. I mean, from and I know you're with Garnet Trust, obviously not the actual coaching staff, but there's some carryover, right? Like working in conjunction, you all have to work well together. Do you feel like maybe there's a couple lingering needs going into the spring? That's maybe more of a coaching staff question.
Yeah, I mean,
just from your understanding.
I think the biggest thing is that they feel good about a lot of the positions that we have. I think let's go through spring ball. Obviously, you got to see who performs whenever the lights come on in practice and who doesn't. Tape is great, but play is more important. And so go through spring ball, see if you have any glaring needs, and then kind of address those potentially in the second portal, whether that be, that could be any position, right? I mean, somebody obviously might overperform and say, okay, we were thinking we need to get another, linebacker, or we need to get another defensive end or whatever it may be. And then we go through the spring, and they're like, we're okay there, right? And they said, well, we actually are underperforming at X position, so we need to go get somebody there. So I don't suspect, but I mean, I think that the coaching staff feels good about where they are, and they can get a better feel for things as we go through the spring practice.
So as we kind of look at things from the Garnet Trust perspective, and Jack and I were talking about this in the last hour. Of course, last year you had a big name and a guy like Rocket Sanders that came over here after having a great season in Arkansas a couple years ago. Even a Kennard who had a decent level of production at Georgia Tech. Obviously, we didn't know what he'd end up being at South Carolina. Ended up working out really well. But you don't have that necessarily super flashy name out of this portal class from another SEC school or another Power 4 institution that's gone out there and is going to garner all the headlines. But obviously, these guys being depth pieces. When you look at things from the Garnet Trust perspective of making deals with these guys once they are on campus, how does that work out for these guys that are not all completely unknowns, but guys that haven't had the same level of production as former guys coming in the portal have?
All right, I want to make sure I'm clear. Not all the guys that we added are depth guys. There are some guys who are absolutely expected to be players whenever they step on campus, potential starters. But just adding, and I say depth, really the idea is adding more competition in the room. I mean, we all know that competition breeds success. I couldn't think of a better person to back up Lenore's or challenge Lenore's in the spring than a guy who was a 5-star out of high school who just is playing for the favorite to win the national championship. So I mean, there is. Yeah, we can look at Aaron Nolan as being a guy who is a depth piece, but there's no doubt about it that Aaron Nolan is very capable of being a really, really, really good quarterback, and will make sure, I think it helps Lenore's and Air get better by them two competing against each other in the spring and over the course of the season. Saying that, I mean, we, from a Garnet Trust NIL perspective, we're excited about all these guys. I mean, we actually had dinner with the transfer portal players last night. We're very excited to get to meet all those guys in person and kind of just get to know where they are and how they feel and where we can see them fitting into the Garnet Trust puzzle as well as fitting into the NIL puzzle. I mean, all of a sudden we might find that a guy has a big interest in a specific food or a specific restaurant is their favorite restaurant or something of that nature, and then we can kind of pair them up, or they might love X to do in their free time. They might like to play golf. They might like to hunt, whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden we can, like last year, we did a fishing expedition with the football players and the basketball players. We picked the 4 guys that like to fish and hunt, right? I mean, so if all of a sudden I've got some guys that come up to me and say, hey, where can I go hunting or where can I go fishing? And then we can help kind of pair them with businesses in the area that can expose those opportunities.
When we know that NIL is a huge band, and just say kids are just going to go wherever they get the highest offer. Are there instances of that? Yes, but that's not all there is to it, and that's something we talk about a lot. If you're South Carolina, you got to be competitive in NIL, because if you're not, you're not going to have a chance. But it doesn't always just come down to who has the most money, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I know an example of multiple 9-3 teams in the SEC this year who spent varying differences of money,
right?
Who all ended up with the same result, right? I mean, and ended up with similarly talented rosters. Mm-hmm. And so clearly you're saying, oh, well, the most money is going to buy the best talent. Yeah, but I mean, you got to have guys that, one, want to go there, mm-hmm. one, are excited about it, two, I think the one thing that you didn't mention that is also a big piece is relationships. I mean, it happened now. I mean, there are guys that, Zay Hardy is a good example, a guy who was committed to the University of South Carolina high school, went to the junior college route, changed coaches through his recruitment process, kind of not, I wouldn't say wavered, but opened up his recruitment, wanted to make sure he was not just closed-minded on South Carolina, and still stuck with the Gamecocks because of the relationship he had built with Clayton White, because of the relationship he had built with Shane Beamer. And so even though we had changed defensive line coaches, he's still a huge piece of the puzzle that we were able to add because of the relationship that he had. I mean, and you look at it, even on guys that we missed on out of the transfer portal, if you look at it, you say, oh, well, this school outbid us for this guy, or this school outbid us for that guy. A lot of it was you look back and they said, oh, well, his high school head, as fans, that goes into this. I mean, the biggest thing is, I mean, sometimes that how do you even recruit a kid if you don't have one, especially in a 2-week stretch, if you don't have a previous relationship? You might not even have their phone number. You might not have a relationship with their high school head coach or their family or anything. I mean, those all things factor into this. I mean, you look at Clemson signed a guy out of the portal from Alabama, and it was no secret that during his recruitment, Clemson was probably his second option. Many people thought was going to be the place where he ended up going until he signed with Alabama out of high school. So it's really no surprise that it wasn't because we obviously know that Clemson is not one of these schools that just shells out a ton of money in the in-house space from this is the first year there are from a transfer portal perspective, and so. He probably could have gotten more money had he gone somewhere else, but he went to a place where he felt comfortable.
You mentioned getting to go to dinner with the transfers last night. I got some questions about that on the other side as you've kind of gotten to know these guys a little bit in their first few days on campus.
Yeah, we'll hit that coming up next. It is the Gamecock Club Hour presented by Krantz Cooling Heating. Hang out with Mark Benoit from the Garnet Trust on your Tuesday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Club Hour presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating. Tyler and Chris hanging out today with Mark Benoit from the Garnet Trust once again. And Mark mentioned a moment ago, having dinner with some of these new transfer portal guys. Out of this group, anything stand out, names to know, not just for what they do on the field, obviously, but personality-wise, or anything interesting you've been able to gather so far?
That Boaz is from Athens, Georgia. Which I the first thing I said was whenever he announced to wherever he was from, I said, I'm sorry for you, but no offense, Tyler, but
no, none
but he said he's got to work on converting his family to be Gamecocks instead of Bulldogs. And then Jordan Dingle is originally from Manning, South Carolina. I had no idea. Obviously, he transferred from Kentucky, has moved around a lot, I think, as a kid, but said last night that he's originally from Manning, so he's very excited to get back closer to home. So those were two things that stuck out just on the surface level. I'm really excited about all these guys. I mean, they were all very engaging. Lots of questions. It was very interesting, I will tell you, and I think that we actually put this out on our tweet this morning, but I asked everybody, when we kind of did a little icebreaker at the beginning of, where you're from, name, position, that kind of stuff, and then why'd you come to South Carolina? Because, I mean, obviously, I'm a Gamecock through and through, have been my entire life. I care that these people have chosen for a year or multiple years to spend some time in Columbia at the University of South Carolina, and so I asked, like, what stood out about this place? And I would say out of the 13 people that were there, I bet 11 of them, their first answer was it felt like home. And, I mean, that's just a credit to Coach Beamer, the entire coaching staff, Darren Usher, the director of player personnel, all those guys from top to bottom. I mean, everybody from the person that walks in the front door to the recruiting visits, the restaurants, everything. I mean, every person. I mean, that is just a testament to the culture that Coach Beamer has continued to build here, and just the way that the type of guys we recruit and the way that we recruit. And so it's not shocking at all, but it is cool to hear that happen in real time, that these guys have been on campus for some of them less than 72 hours, and that's the first thing they say is that it feels like home.
Yeah, I mean, you actually stole, that was going to be my exact question, is have you kind of gathered from some of these players why they actually chose South Carolina? And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about first segment. Some people just say, well, there's just the money, but the other things matter.
Well, and I mean, and you know this, every single one of these guys is good enough to get money at most schools, right? Yeah. I mean, it's not like they're going to go somewhere for free.
That's right.
So it's not, in a lot of instances, it doesn't become the money that makes a difference. It becomes where they see themselves fitting in, where they see themselves being a chance to be a difference maker. I think a lot of these guys look at what we did on defense this year and say, hey, I mean, look at, I mean, you've got a guy like Demetrius Knight, a transfer from Charlotte, was probably not on a single draft board before he came to the University of South Carolina. Most Gamecock fans probably not until 5 games into the season even knew who Demetrius Knight was. And then he's going to probably be a day 2. You think that's fair? Day 2 draft guy, maybe a day 3? Early
He'll get drafted. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get drafted. Yeah. And I mean, I know this firsthand that a coach on our staff called the GM for a pro team who has played in the Super Bowl the past couple of years, and they were talking about some other players, and the first question that they said was, what do you know about number 17? And so, but all that to say, they see how, and the transfers now see how in 1 year they can come be a part of Coach White's system, Coach Beamer's culture, be a part of a really good defense, and then all of a sudden their life really changed forever. Their trajectory of their life changed forever. And then on the offense side of the ball, who doesn't want to play with Lenore Sellers, right? I mean, if you want to be a running back with Lenore Sellers, you want to be a wide receiver for Lenore Sellers, you want to be a tight end for Lenore Sellers, you want to go block for Lenore Sellers, then I mean that is just it's two good recruiting tools on both sides. Another thing that stuck out, Tyler, I know I'm kind of rambling on here.
All good.
Nick Sharp is a big, big human being. He was, I mean, whatever he weighs in at online on his profile.
6'2", 335.
I mean, he checks out every possible box of that. He is a big guy. I mean, some real size on it for an interior offense lineman, and I think that he will have no problem getting in front of some SEC defensive linemen.
And of course, what happens on the field is very important. But Beamer's not been shy about talking about culture fits and guys that just fit with what South Carolina is. And there are guys that have come to Carolina that are no longer here that maybe didn't quite fit that mold. But from what you gathered from meeting these guys for the first time, being around them a little bit, would you say all those kind of fit the culture of what South Carolina football is trying to be?
Out of those guys, there is no worry to me, at least on the surface of a culture problem at South Carolina. I think all those guys are excited to be here. They want to be here. They want to be a part of what we're building, and I think they can all be key contributors to what we're doing.
How different do you think this off-season portal cycle was from the last one? From what I've heard, what I've kind of gathered in just covering recruiting, it seems like, just to be frank, the numbers were higher, this offseason across the country. I'm not talking about just here, of course. There were, I haven't looked at the data lately, but there are lots of kids that enter the portal. So it seems like it was just a more robust market overall.
Yeah, more robust. I think obviously there's a little bit of proof of concept. You've seen some of these teams kind of go heavy into the transfer portal and it work. Obviously, you had Arizona State who went from, what were they, 3-9 last year to 10-2 this year. You've got Colorado who didn't make a bowl game last year, that they were competitive for the Big 12 championship at the end of the season. You've got schools who were kind of borderline playoff teams that, I mean, look at SMU. I mean, I could go down the list. I mean, there's absolutely like a proof of concept that I think has an impact on it. And then two, with revenue sharing coming in, maybe a little bit more regulation on the spending side of things, then I think that it obviously this is people's last chance to, if they've got some cash saved up, to kind of, I hate to say blow it, but to spend it, right? I mean, we know what the future looks like for the next 6 months. We don't know necessarily what the future looks like this time next year for transfer portal season. So let's try to win now. And get what you can get. I mean, and two, I mean, look at it from our perspective. Ross Dellinger, I think, actually mentioned us in an article along with Levitt from Arizona State. Lenoris and Levitt is like, you've got probably the most expensive piece of the puzzle already in place. Let's go build around it, right? Mm-hmm. And so you know for a fact that you're only going to have those pieces in place for a short-lived window. And
yeah, so, it's a finite.
Right, and so, I mean, it is a finite amount of time, and so you've got to go build around that.
We'll continue this conversation with Mark Benoit from the Garnet Trust as the Gamecock Club Hour presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating rolls on your Tuesday here on The Game.
All right, our presenting sponsor here on the Gamecock Club Hour, always Krantz Cooling and Heating. That's KRANTZ, coolingwithak.com. Give them a call, 803-672-3224. Since 1983, Krantz Cooling and Heating, their family and locally owned and operated business, has been helping families and businesses all around the Midlands with their HVAC service. Obviously, it's really cold right now in the Midlands, so you want to make sure that your heating system is working in tip-top shape. If you have an area of your home that's not heating properly, give them a call, 803-672-3224. If you got a garage that you want to heat, like I did at my house, they can put in a mini-split system for you. I actually trusted them to go out to my mom's home in Irmo. They did 2 mini-split systems for her as well. Krantz Cooling, that's Krantz with a K, coolingwithak.com. Shout out to Justin Krantz, their general manager since 1983. KrantzCooling.com for HVAC service.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Club Hour presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating. Tyler Head, Chris Clark, along with you, hanging out with Mark Benoit from the Garnet Trust on your Tuesday here in the game. Let's take a broader look at NIL and everything going on around college sports now. Of course, we've turned the calendar over 2025. That means revenue sharing is right around the corner. And since the last time we talked, Mark, what, if anything, has changed or looks different in terms of positioning South Carolina to be in the best spot when this thing does go live here very soon?
As far as what's changed, I do feel like I've gotten a sense that maybe there's going to be a few more objections to the House settlement than I anticipated. I still feel like the majority of what's been talked about will go into effect starting on July 1. We've got a little bit more clarity as far as like how that looks and where Garnet Trust and other collectives fit into that. Jeremy and I are actually headed up to D.C. At the beginning of February to meet with some congressmen, some senators, some staff to talk about that. I do expect there to be some movement in the new administration with the new Congress on some federal NIL legislation. What that looks like, I don't know yet, but we want to make sure that Garnet Trust obviously has an input. The Collective Association, which we're a member of, continues to have a leading voice in D.C., and so trying to Senator Cruz is going to be the committee chairman on the Senate side. I actually feel, regardless of political beliefs, across the board, I feel good that from an SEC kind of perspective, he seems to get it. He is a big Texas A&M guy, which is not always great for the Gamecocks, but he does seem to understand kind of our culture, what makes football important in the South, how we can keep teams like South Carolina relevant in that space, and doesn't, as much as he probably would love Texas and Texas A&M to continue to dominate the sport, then I think he understands the importance of where we are across the board from a NIL perspective.
Is there a chance that, two-part question, is there a chance that the House settlement falls apart? It seems like there's been some problems or questions with it, and if it did, what does that mean for all this? Like, everybody's banking on revenue sharing.
Right. Fall apart is probably far-fetched, I guess. I mean, there's still always a chance, right? I mean,
more likely we see tweaks or something.
Right. I think that maybe there's a delay. I think there's if it were to not go through on April 7th or whenever the last hearing is, then I think there's a chance that maybe there's a delay. There is some tweaks to the final settlement of what it looks like. I don't know exactly but schools are still absolutely full-fledged moving toward preparing for revenue share because you have to. I mean, I don't think there's really an option if you're going to be behind the eight ball if you don't.
I saw something interesting on Twitter X from Jim Cavale, who founded Influencer, and now he's the founder and chairman of Athletes.org, which is athlete advocacy organization, basically. And he believes that college football players, and I think he's just keeping this college football specific, not what basketball, women's basketball, baseball, anything like that. College football players need to engage in a non-employee collective negotiation, is what he calls it, and agree to the schools that are, just all the schools out there, the conferences in the college football playoff, not the NCAA, and then agree on all of these issues that we're all talking about. So transfer portal, if you want to call it free agency, whatever you want to call it, minimum and maximum contracts, a salary cap, how many years are you going to be eligible, right? Because that's a question that's ongoing. Bonuses, health and safety benefits. What do you think about that as far as maybe the NCAA gets cut out, maybe they don't, but just some type of negotiation to where we have more structure? Because what we're trying to do right now, Mark, is run college football, and we're trying to do a semi-professional model without some of the protections and some of the things that actually make that model work.
Well, I mean, listen, the first thing I always say is that you've got to have some help from a congressional standpoint, as much as that might pain some people to hear, because you cannot continue to govern college football via litigation.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't, because
messy.
I mean, it just is lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, right? You can't do that. Second, I think that I am always a big believer that the man that does the paying does the saying. I told you this yesterday, actually, but the problem has been, at least for the last 10 years, 12 years now, I guess, the college football playoff, the Autonomy 5, the Power 5, have been primarily doing the paying from a college football standpoint, but we're following the rules of the NCAA, who still distributes money to schools, not to the same amount that schools are making from the College Football Playoff Committee, or those TV contracts.
Yeah.
And so that's where there's obviously a disconnect, is we're following the NCAA rules, but we are being paid by the college football, and the schools are being, compensated by the college football playoff. So clearly there has to be some alignment there, whether that be the Autonomy 5 or Autonomy 4, I guess at that point, definitely deserves some level of a bigger stake or in the rule-making process. I do think collective bargaining, if you can get to, like as you described, a collective bargaining agreement without employee status would be like the dream scenario, I think, for schools, because it kind of checks all the boxes. The biggest thing that I think is important is like where a salary cap comes into play is in the NFL, you have a salary cap, but it still doesn't limit NIL. And that's always going to be the argument. It's like in America, from a capitalist standpoint, you cannot limit what somebody can make.
Yeah.
The difference is, and I never even knew this until I guess we got through this process in the past couple of months, is that so Deloitte, we think Deloitte, but a third party is going to be determining fair market value for NIL deals, right? And they're going to determine, they're going to approve fair market, are going to provide a fair market analysis and do some kind of fair market deal to prove that. The model that they're basing that off of is something that the NFL came up with, I think in the in the 80s, where owners were going to try to circumvent the salary cap instituted by the NFL, using their businesses that they already own to pay their starting quarterback.
Really?
And sponsorship dollars, endorsement dollars. So the idea is that Arthur Blank can't sign Kirk Cousins for $100 million and then say, okay, well, 10 of it is going to come from the salary cap and 90 of it is going to come from Home Depot, right?
Right.
And so that's why that process existed. And I never even knew that. I think it actually started because of Dan Marino down in the Dolphins. I don't know who was owning the Miami Dolphins at the time, but that was the idea, was that, okay, I could pay Dan Marino $1 million and then I could pay him another $4 million. Probably at the time was five. I would imagine Dan Marino was probably $5 million, probably the highest paid guy in the league at the time. But could do the other $4 million via whatever company the owner of the Miami Dolphins had. And they said, no, you can't do that. And so in theory, that sounds great, right? That because the Texas oil guy owns Exxon, then he can't just say, okay, well, take zero money from the salary cap or from the cap, the revenue sharing cap, and I'll pay you all of the contract via an Exxon deal. I think that is the basis of where we're trying to go.
So going back to what you were talking about a moment ago, and Ross Dellinger's got a good story on this the other day on yahoosports.com about these power conferences eventually trying to get their own power, whether it be individually or as a group, kind of breaking away from the NCAA. Look, it's taken us this long to even get on the footsteps of the revenue sharing. How long of a process did that take? And is that as easy? Is it easier said than done of just breaking away and starting this whole new thing when the NCAA has obviously presided over college sports for well over 100 years up to this point?
It's very hard. From a football standpoint, I don't think it's that hard, Tyler. I think from where the struggle is that the NCAA basketball tournament in March for men's and women's and all the listen, if you sat here and said all non-profit generating sports, non-revenue generating sports, whatever you want to define them as, were governed under the NCAA and they kind of had their own stuff. That's fine, I think. But I think that for football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, probably, and specifically in the South, what is college baseball without the College World Series, without Omaha? And so I think from a college football standpoint, it's probably not as hard because you've already got a little bit of that autonomy 5 college football playoff kind of rules that have already governed anyways. But I think you run into some, the NCAA tournament between the men's and the women's is $1 billion+ industry every year that is distributed to schools. And there's a lot of money that South Carolina and, we've obviously done super well with it because of last year we had the men's and women's team that were in there. And I think you get paid a little extra whenever you get the guys in there. So that's where the holdup is. And that's what the NCAA is going to hold on to, is that they provide, and props to them. If I provided $1 billion of revenue every year, I'd be clinging on to what I can as well.
It's one more quick point. I do agree that is the dream scenario, is some type of we got to have collective bargaining to fix this thing, because, like, to your point about in America, we're finding out, the NCAA is finding out from the courts, you can't limit people's compensation. Doesn't matter if they're quote unquote college kids or not. You can't limit it, right? And that's what the courts are saying. In the NFL, technically, they are limited because of those rules. The rule that you just outlined, that Arthur Blank can't pay somebody X amount from his business, but that's collectively bargained. You have the players, and then you have the NFL. They each have their own side that advocates, but at the end of the day, they all agree on it.
Right.
They agree on it, and you sign up for it. And if you don't want to sign up for it, you don't have to play in the NFL, right? And so eventually, we've got to get to that point to where it's a great point you made, Mark. You can't just constantly, okay, here's the rule for today. Oh, new lawsuit, new ruling. Oh, now we got to change the rule. That's what the NCAA is having to constantly do, and it's just not sustainable to do it that way.
We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Club Hour, hanging out with Mark Benoit from the Garnet Trust here on your Tuesday on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Club Hour presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating. Tyler and Chris hanging out with Mark Benoit from the Garnet Trust here on your Tuesday. Reminder, tomorrow, men's basketball back in action, taking on Vanderbilt, 6 o'clock tip, 5:30 pregame here on the game in Columbia, as well as 100.3 the game in Myrtle Beach. Thursday, women's team in action, 6:30 pregame, 7 o'clock tip versus Alabama. That's on our sister station, 90.5 WOMG. Mark, always like to get your thoughts on what's going on around Gamecock sports. And as we've entered conference play, obviously the women looking as strong as ever, and the men unfortunately getting off to a little bit of a rougher start, though. Last weekend against Auburn at least gave you some hope as they head into these next couple games against Vanderbilt and Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little concerned to see. Not concerned. I was interested to see how the women would respond without Ashlyn on Sunday, and what a Texas top 5 team in the country, very talented. Vic Schaefer, who's been a coach in the SEC for a long time and was a little bit of our Achilles heel there for a little bit whenever he was at Mississippi State, but has done and so, I mean, great job to the girls. I mean, they did an outstanding job against Texas on Sunday. Disappointing start for the boys. Mississippi State, Alabama, Auburn, back to start, might be the toughest opening in SEC play that anybody else has had to have this year. The SEC is very good from top to bottom, and I think that showed that, I think by net standards, we're probably considered the 16th team in the conference. By net standards, Auburn is considered the number 1 team in the conference, and we were in a dogfight with them from start to finish. It was not a fluke that the Gamecocks were in that fight. They played really, really good basketball. And the reality is, I will say, I mean, that is how we played on Saturday for us to win. And I mean, I will say this. If you play like you did on Saturday, you can win 8 conference games. You can win 9 conference games. I know that it's not the start that we need, and then you have to finish off really strong. If you play like that for the next 15 games, you'll win half of them for sure, or more than half. And so, but that's the style that Lamont's has got to have the guys playing a little bit, I think. I mean, slow the pace of the game down, take good, smart shots, rebound. We out-rebounded them. And there was a point in the game, I actually looked at the stat yesterday. I saw that we ended up, I think we outshot them by 4 shots by the end of the game. But there was at one point in the first half where we had taken, I think, 14 more shots than they had at one point, because we were getting offensive rebounds and we were limiting them to 1 shot. Listen, that is our key. It is a game of percentages. You limit them to one okay shot per possession, then you're going to end up okay, because I mean, you can't make enough okay shots or okay looks to be able to score 80 or 90 points, and that's where we probably need to be. Is we're gonna have to win some games that are 65 to 64, 66 to 63. I mean, that's going to be our neighborhood that we have to make our bread and butter on.
Yeah, and I even think South Carolina, there's a good argument if you say South Carolina outplayed Auburn throughout the course of the game and still lost, because I think really you look at it, there's going to be a focus on the missed free throws, and Nick Pringle took accountability for that. But I think Auburn down the stretch, second half, like they just made some shots. They made some tough shots from outside. I mean, and that's their game. That's their game. Yeah.
And we were able to limit the first half, and their defense locked down in the second half. We're able to we were able to kind of run our offense through Colin in the first half. They were able to limit that, but I mean, Colin Murray-Boyles, Nick Pringle, Arden Conyers had a great game. Zach Davis made some good plays. I mean, we've shown that we can collectively be cohesive. I thought it was interesting. We went to which was a change from Alabama. We ran, obviously losing Miles. I think Coach Paris was trying to kind of figure out how he's going to replace those 25 minutes a game or so that Miles was playing. Mm-hmm. We went to a very, very thin lineup. I think we only played 7 guys on Saturday, and it worked. So maybe that's the recipe for us moving forward.
I think you made a good point. The schedule difficulty gives you some wiggle room, because you're going to have, quote unquote quality losses, right?
We moved up in the net.
That's right. You have quality losses, and you're going to have a lot of opportunities to make up the deficit that you have because you have so many quad one opportunities. But at some point, you've got that in your back pocket. But at some point, you do have to win some games.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously.
In the words of Shane Beamer, you got to kick the door down, right?
Yeah,
you can knock on it as much as you want, but you got to kick it down. And we were knocking for sure. Very loud to the Auburn Tigers on Saturday, but we got to kick the door down. I mean, but look, we play Oklahoma, we play Vanderbilt this week. Both those teams, I think, had 12-plus wins going into conference play. Vanderbilt started 1-2. Oklahoma started 0-3. Listen, we got these 3 games behind us. You play like you did on Saturday against those teams, and I feel very confident on the road that you can go win both of those games.
Last one for you here. What's your lean on the national championship on Monday?
I think that Notre Dame is being discredited a little bit. I saw the line is still at 8.5. I think is what I saw it was yesterday in Ohio State's favor. I think that they can. I think Notre Dame can hang more than that line is saying they can. I think Texas not exposed, but was the first team really, and since Michigan, I guess, to show how you can slow down Ohio State. I mean, realistically, I know they won by 14. They won by 7 points. I mean, that you can't. You had Texas knocking on the door, and they should have won, or should have scored. But that's the way it worked out. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens on Monday. Appreciate it as always, Mark, and we'll wait your 2,500th trip in here coming up soon, I'm sure.
Thank you. Go Cox.
That'll do it for the Gamecock Club Hour presented by Crane Cooling and Heating. Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Tuesday here on the Game.
All right, it is lunchtime as the 11 o'clock hour approaches here, and the presenting sponsor, always, every day of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hours, our friends over at Firehouse Subs. Shout out Larry Chandler, owner and operator of all 15 and growing Firehouse Subs locations all around the Midlands, and that means no matter where you are in the Midlands, there is a Firehouse Subs close to you. All of your Firehouse Subs favorites, of course, are still available. Lunch, dinner, catering options for the event that you've got coming up. The hot sauce bar is back, so if you're a Firehouse Subs OG, you've been going for a while, and you missed the hot sauce bar, it's back. Add some flavor to any sub when you dine in or pick up. Again, 15 different locations all around the Midlands. And go check out the new French dip sandwich for a limited time only before it's gone. Premium cut roast beef, caramelized onions, 2 different kinds of cheeses on the hot toasted sub roll with au jus sauce for dipping. FirehouseSubs.com or download the Firehouse Subs app today.
11 o'clock on your Tuesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West Chris along with you here. Halfway through the month of January. Of course, tons and tons of transportal news has been coming in over the course of the past couple weeks. But, guys, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. The portal cycle seemingly starting to come to a close for Carolina, at least in this winter portion, and highlighted last night by Brandon Cisse eventually or finally making his commitment to South Carolina out of NC State last night.
Yeah, guys, and I think obviously a good way to potentially finish this window for South Carolina, and kind of a cherry on top type of get, I think. And we went in, we knew Carolina wanted to add at defensive back. Weren't quite sure what that might even look like. We knew, obviously, they added Miles Norwood earlier in this cycle. And then you said, will they go out and get a second defensive back or not? I think that was probably going to be determined by who was out there, who made sense, where was their mutual interest. And then, lo and behold, here's a guy from right down the road, Sumter, South Carolina, who has incredibly high interest in your program and has proved that he can go play and do it at the Power 4 level, obviously at NC State. So I think this one, frankly, just made a lot of sense. You know, Chris, we'll get into who he is as a player and what he brings and how he fits. But this is another nice sort of SEC recruiting win for South Carolina when you look at the fact that you were going head-to-head with Ole Miss. You got Lane Kiffin trolling you on social media, just being Lane. And then you had Florida trying to get involved, Georgia trying to get involved. I think some of the schools that were heavily interested in Brandon Cisse does speak to his ability and his production as a player. And also one of the more highly recruited, like highly rated guys, I should say, out of the transfer portal that South Carolina has landed during this window.
Yeah, it's a meaningful get. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it is about who you sign as a player. You know, the personality and all that matters, like the culture fit. We were talking about that last hour, West, with Mark. It's not even about who you miss on. It's about who you get, because who you get is on your football team, and they're going to determine your success. You got to have excellent personnel, as we know. That's why we all have followed recruiting for so long, and you know, probably follow it even closer than we used to because of the transfer portal. You can get better, you know, in a hurry. You can plug holes faster, and that's why people love the transfer portal. Even though they say they hate it, they actually, you know, secretly, I would say, love it.
When it benefits you.
When it benefits you, that's right. So, you know, it's about who you get and the on-field impact, which, as you said, Wes, we'll get into. But, you know, something that matters to the fan base, or heck, it can even matter for your recruiting efforts, is just, you know, is it a good look to get a guy? You know, is it meaningful kind of just from a perception standpoint? And this is one that is, because this is an in-state kid, played at Lakewood, out of high school. A lot of the signs were he would have really loved a South Carolina offer. He didn't get one at that time, which, in fairness, he didn't get a lot of the offers that he's picked up out of the portal, which is, you know, a positive thing for kids if they, you know, you got a chance to go to another school, whether it's a smaller level, another Power 4 school, whatever, and you can earn yourself the offers that maybe you didn't get out of high school by doing that. And so that's what happened with Cisse here. He really raised his profile after he went to NC State and played well for a couple years. But the perception of this is a win, right? Because in-state kid, you're able to win that battle. Ole Miss, as we know, I mean, we all joke about it. If there's a talented kid in the portal, Ole Miss is probably recruiting him, and there's kind of some truth to that. So for Kiffin to, I mean, Ole Miss made a huge push here. They made it very difficult. And to be able to win out, you know, is significant in more ways than one, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you look at Cisse as a player, we talked about this a bit when we were just talking about the potential of adding him, but to go a little more in-depth on it, I think he's a fit for what Carolina is and wants to be defensively. And you look at a defense that is going to take on at least a much different look in terms of the key players going into next year. We know there is no Nick E coming back. There is no Demetrius Knight or Debo Williams or or probably not a Bam Martin Scott at linebacker, Kyle Kennard gone. Who are going to be your playmakers on this team? And I think the best South Carolina defenses that we have seen over the years, they all play with an edge. And I was talking to some guys who are more familiar with the NC State program than us, and that was one of the first things they told me about Cisse is this kid plays with a chip on his shoulder, plays with an edge. There were some questions out of high school about kind of the size and the speed, but he's put on some good weight in his time at NC State. He actually apparently ran a 4.4 at NC State's camp out of high school, so maybe was a good bit quicker than he was given credit for as a high school recruit. Has some length to him. And I would even say, just as important as all those other things, he likes to hit. And you don't always see that with a cornerback prospect. This is a guy who has played safety at times, at least during his high school career, and so is willing to come up and hit you. That's actually reflected in his PFF grades as well. One of the more high tackle grades I've ever seen for a true corner on PFF. And I do just like the position versatility here too, guys. It's all about adding players who can help you. And, one of the questions I saw come across social media was, hey, do we really need another cornerback? I had several people I saw on social media ask that. And I would say, first of all, yes. Now, could you have gotten by if you didn't? Probably. But I think you did need to add another defensive back. And the thing about him, for me, is the position versatility. This is someone who could play cornerback for you, but this is also someone who could play nickelback for you. And as we know, Jalen Kilgore is going to be a starter somewhere. I'm not saying he's going to come in and steal Jalen's job, but this would open you up potentially to move a Jalen Kilgore into more of a Nick Emmanwori role, and then have Cisse potentially playing nickelback. We'll see how some of the other guys at that spot sort of come along. But I think this just gives you options in the secondary, which is something you always want.
Again, you mentioned his Pro Football Focus grades, very high tackling number. Look at his coverage grade. And again, 60 being the baseline is as good, and anything above that is very strong, a 70.5. Over the course of the entire year, he did not play every single game, but kind of looking at his numbers in terms of targets and receptions allowed, only one game this year where he allowed more than 50 yards. That was against Clemson. TJ Moore had a 40-yard reception against him, but for the most part, he's kept most of the receivers he's covered in check. Like you said, he's the ability to play on the outside, also the ability to play some slot as well, and just a very versatile and experienced guy that you're adding to a room that does have experience, but certainly he's going to be in the mix to be one of these starters right out of the gate.
I think it's important to, and you talked about this, Wes, just now, you want to insulate yourself by building depth. You don't want to go into a season saying, we're pretty thin here, because then you're an injury away, you're whatever happening away from losing somebody. Everybody intends to come back on South Carolina's roster. The reality of 2024, the year 2025, is that guys can still, they can still leave, really, if they wanted to, in a lot of instances. And so you always want to insulate yourself. And Wes, you use this example a lot, but like if you're looking at the offensive line, I know we're talking about DB, but this is a really instructive example. Look at 2023, and that the injuries that year on the offensive line would have been hard for any team to overcome because there were so many of them. You're having trouble even practicing effectively because it's not just starters, it's not just depth guys. It's like you're going down to walk-ons with the 8, 9, 10, 11 injuries that you had at a given time. That makes it tough to even practice effectively. It seems like we've seen South Carolina the past 2 cycles almost be bound and determined to let's build enough depth to where we can insulate ourselves as well as possible. And I think you want to do that where you can at all positions. The portal lets you do that because then it's not just, hey, if we lose a guy or two, now we're counting on a freshman. You may still have some of those instances. You may have an instance where a freshman or an inexperienced player is your next best option. but the portal does allow you to go in and find guys that have proven experience at some level. So where Cisse ends up, I think it depends on so many factors. Where does he play? How much does he play? It depends on a lot of things, whether it's the positional questions that you brought up, Wes, just how he looks once he gets to camp and acclimates. He'll be able to go through the spring as an early enrollee. That'll be big. He'll be able to go through summer. He'll be able to go through preseason camp. There's a lot to sort out between now and then, but that's a good problem to have. You came into this cycle wanting really one defensive back to bolster your room. You got that in Miles Norwood. Cisse, like you said, more of a cherry on top, but it builds additional depth for you, and that's never a bad thing at any position in college football.
Yeah, and being a local guy too, man, I think it made all the sense in the world. Number 9 cornerback in the transfer portal, but again, can play kind of that slot corner spot for you. And I even think this maybe opens some things up for you in terms of every year you're going to look at your talent, you're going to look at the skill sets, you're going to say, all right, what makes sense for us this year? Does it open the door for you just a little bit to maybe match up a little bit in terms of who is playing that nickelback spot? Do you play a little bit bigger guy in Kilgore on early downs or against run teams? And I know we're getting all up into the weeds a little bit early here, but you could potentially still play Kilgore at safety some while still playing him at nickelback some. And then depending on down distance opponent, who plays kind of that slot receiver role for the team that you're playing against, and that's who your nickelback's going to be matched up across from a bunch of times in a game. Just mix and match in terms of what you're facing. I think you just always want to have options. And, there's some guys in that secondary that are going to be difficult to replace, but Torian Gray has done such a fantastic job of building a foundation in his room. And so what you have is a foundation of guys who are coming back, and you didn't look at it saying, well, hey, we got to take 2 safeties and 2 corners this cycle. You already knew what the foundation was. It was more about let's supplement, let's get this overall position into a spot where we feel good about it. And to your point earlier, Chris, you can never anticipate what spot are you going to have that unfortunate injury where all of a sudden, you may have looked at it on paper and said, wow, I feel great about these 5 guys without adding anyone. But then you're one just bad false step in a practice or one knee in a workout from all of a sudden that picture looking different. And as we've talked about, it's not the NFL. You can't just go out and get a replacement player in the middle of a season in college. So anything you can do to bolster that depth. And I think that the sort of thing you have to add here, we're not talking about depth in terms of just depth, as in, this guy has to be a backup. I think with Norwood and with Cisse, you have increased the competitive depth. These are guys who have the potential, both of them, to come in and start in some role, and you just let them all fight it out, and let's see, may the best man win in terms of who those first 5 guys on the field are going to be.
We'll take a deeper look at the entire defensive back room now that we have kind of closed up this portal cycle. Coming up next is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, rolls on your Tuesday here on The Game.
I'm going to give y'all a 2-for-1 here. You just heard about Pro Swing and their upcoming golf tournament. We're actually going to be out at the new Pro Swing location this Friday. That's 4708 Forest Drive B. 4708B Forest Drive in Columbia. We're going to be out at Pro Swing from 9 to noon, hitting some golf balls, talking some Gamecock sports. And you can come check us out there. And you can check out Michael, Nathan, and what they've got going on at Pro Swing. Forest Acres. If you're closer to Chapin, go out to Snapdragon Court. Check out the first, Pro Swing location out there. And while you're out there, go to the experience room over at Integrated Media, because that's Michael and Nathan's other company. Anything you need from an audiovisual standpoint, they got you covered. IntegratedMediaInc.com or 803-948-8327. Check them out for any of your audio-visual needs.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris along with you on your Tuesday. It is time to flip the card over and check the stats brought to you by our friends over at Palmetto Cards in Lexington. We're talking about the secondary for South Carolina's defense this past year, ranked 44th nationally in yards allowed per game, just a tick under 205. So a very productive year and what was a very good defense overall. And as we kind of look ahead to 2025, as we've wrapped up this portal window, obviously you're going to be losing Nicky Moore at the safety spot. You're going to be losing O'Donnell Fortune at one of the corner spots, but you have a ton of experience coming back. Obviously, DQ Smith, Jelon Kilgore, as you talked about at that nickel safety spot, Judge Collier, Vicari Swain, these guys that have played a lot, in addition to adding guys like Cisse and Miles Norwood out of the transfer portal at those corner spots as well.
There's a name that we have not mentioned at all over the past 21 minutes of the show, talking about defensive back Jalewis Solomon. Now, he's not among the experience that you mentioned. So I'm in a way, Tyler, I'm hijacking your points. Sorry.
That's okay.
But Jalewis Solomon, it dawned on me when we were talking about, the nickel position in the last segment. Jalewis Solomon was a big recruiting get for South Carolina. Beat out Auburn for him, had a bunch of offers, 4-star guy. Where does he fit in? I think there's going to be so much to sort out during the spring. But while we're talking about the returners, while we're talking about a couple of transfer portal additions, I think we have to keep Jalewis Solomon in mind there at corner, where he was at the end of the year, at nickel. Heck, I think he could play safety, but it seems like he's been more of a corner or nickel for South Carolina. And you're also adding in a few freshmen. Probably you're most intrigued by Kendall Daniels because, you lose a Nicky Manwari, who's kind of a unicorn, right? But Kendall Daniels is the closest thing from like a size, skill set perspective to a Nicky Manwari, because this is a big, 6'3", 6'4" kid, who looks a little bit more like a linebacker frame, but can play safety. So a lot of guys returning. I'm interested to see David Busey's growth, from year one to year two. This is a guy that played really well on special teams, got a little bit of run in games as a safety. There are just so many names here where I think the defensive back situation is going to be among the most competitive and the most interesting to track at all three of the positions as we go into this year. You figure that, Judge Collier, he's going to take a spot. But there's a lot of questions. Jalen Kilgore is going to be a starter somewhere, but where? And then who steps up behind them? Are there any surprises in this mix? Do any of the freshmen, make a little bit of a run for playing time? A lot of interesting questions around this position.
Yeah, and I mean, DQ obviously going to be a starter somewhere.
Yes.
You would imagine at safety. So, I think it should be an interesting spring in terms of maybe spreading some guys around and trying them at different spots. To Chris's point, I mean, Solomon is the guy you look at and say, talent-wise, could have the ability to just take that big step and show he's ready. Obviously, guys sort of get comfortable, you could call it, at different rates. And so Solomon was one we were tracking last year. Will he play? Will he not play? I think most of us probably would have thought he would get into the mix a little bit more last year. And Kelvin Hunter was right there with him, sort of, at least on the depth chart, was tied for that number 2 spot at nickelback. And then as the year went on, we saw Solomon, when he did get into some games, which was really just late action, game is over type situations, he was playing more cornerback towards the end. So I do think you've got position versatility with a lot of these guys. And you add in the fact that as of right now, appears that Jaquel Holman will probably be in that defensive back room. That was something where we had wondered what that was going to look like coming into the season. And when South Carolina landed him, is he going to be a sort of smaller but can add weight to his frame linebacker? Is he going to be a running back? Is he going to be a defensive back? As of right now, looks like he'll be kind of a nickel safety type. So I think for Carolina in that room, you feel pretty good about the talent. It's just a matter of which guys take those big steps forward this year. And Torian Gray has a history of development among his players. And it's a little bit of an old school take to that room in terms of you don't have to completely replace guys with the transfer portal. It's more about, hey, you're the young guy. You get a little bit of playing time early in your career, and then when it's your time to step forward, you step in and you be the guy. And that's been the case for a lot of those positions. OD Fortune got a great shot to be drafted this year. How many times have we seen South Carolina just sort of next man up at that cornerback spot?
Well, and speaking of next man up, we talk about adding guys at corner. You haven't added anybody up to this point at the safety spot via the transfer portal. And given the fact that Peyton Williams, going back to the last game in the Citrus Bowl, stepped in for Eamon Orey in the second half, has obviously got to play a lot throughout the entire season. Is that his spot to lose at this point in time? Does he have a definite edge going into the spring at that other safety spot?
Wes, what do you think?
I think day one of spring practice, he'll be first guy up. He'll be next guy up. I'm not ready to lock him into starting. I think the question there will be, is he ready to be that player that is a full-on starter? Does South Carolina see him in that role, or do they see him more as someone who is better in the role that he's been in, which is next man up, depth guy, step in and play when needed? I think to kind of take it full circle, I think the answer to that question lies within that nickelback spot, because there was a lot of buzz, and we'll see if this actually happens, because to be fair, to be truthful, we hear about potential little position shifts fairly often in the offseason, and it doesn't always actually play out that way. But I've heard, this was in the middle of this season, I've heard the thought process could be that Kilgore ultimately plays safety. If Kilgore is playing safety, it's going to be to start, and it would be Kilgore and DQ Smith. That would be your two guys. I think those would be your two favorites. If Kilgore is playing nickelback, then Kilgore is starting at nickelback. He's a starter somewhere among this five. And so I think a lot of that depends on who steps up elsewhere. It's always about what gets your best five, because in this defense, your base, you play 5 DBs. What gets your best 5 guys on the field for South Carolina? Kilgore is one of your best ones. We'll see who the other ones are. And I'm glad Chris brought up Kendall Daniels, because he is one that has the potential, that has the upside. Again, let's wait and see, when does the light bulb sort of switch on in terms of him being ready. But this dude could potentially be special at South Carolina.
Take a look at this entire portal class up to this point, as it does seem to have come to a close for South Carolina, at least in the winter portion so far. Hit that. Coming up next is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on your Tuesday here on The Game.
All right, our friends over at Classic Roofing can help you with all of your residential and commercial roofing needs. Taking good care of your roof can be very challenging. There's a lot of questions, a lot of concerns with the roof. You don't have to do it alone. If you aren't sure if you have damage, if you aren't sure if you need a new roof, they can help you with it. Anything that you may have from a roofing standpoint, classicroofingsc.com. You can go there to get a free estimate. You can see how they do things. You got really cool video that can help you visualize what your new roof could look like. And they are reliable GAF certified roofers. Only about 7% of roofers nationwide carry that designation. Roof inspections, installations, replacements, and repairs for residential and commercial businesses all around the Midlands. ClassicRoofingSC.com. Our friends Joe Reeder and Max Sawyer can do it for you. 803-590-7870.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West, Chris, along with you on your Tuesday here on the game. Well, let you know about the Winter Indoor Golf Tournament. The first annual Pro Swing Golf Classic is coming. It is a 2-day event, January 30th and 31st. $150 to enter for a two-man team. Bookings are available from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Food is included. You can win $1,000 for first place, $750 for second, $500 for third, and plus there'll be a drawing for Gamecock baseball tickets that you could win just by registering. So give Pro Swing a call at 803-528-1617. Again, that's 803-528-1617 to sign up for the first annual Pro Swing Golf Classic coming up at the end of January. I've been talking all things transfer portal so far this morning. Again, Carolina adding the latest signing with Brandon Cisse yesterday out of NC State to cap the winter portion, at least, of the transfer portal class at 13. And as we've kind of talked about a lot, you have guys from various levels. You have guys from the SEC, guys from Group of Five, guys from all over the country with varying levels of experience coming in. The important part for this cycle of portal guys relied on building depth, because you had so many spots that were just gutted because you were such a senior-laden and experienced team this past season. You knew there was going to be some holes to fill, and you don't have the wow, superstar, flashy guy necessarily like a Rocket Sanders that you had a year ago. But you're going to have to see how these guys develop through the spring, through the summer, and ultimately which of these guys do find their way onto the field in starting or rotational roles when the fall rolls around.
You know, I think there are some guys that are going to make big impacts on this team, and there are going to be guys that are a little bit more along the lines of being quality depth additions. Some of the guys, you're right, there's not, Rocket Sanders was a guy who was already an SEC running back, had a huge 2022 where he rushed for 1,400 yards. And he obviously, look at what he did this past season. He had a huge impact on the team. That said, I look at somebody like Rasul Faison. He's coming from not an SEC program. He's coming from, Tyler, you'll have to make sure I'm right, the Mountain West?
Yes,
is that today?
Utah State is the Mountain West.
Okay. I knew they were, but I didn't know if that had changed in the last, 48 hours. Coming from a Mountain West school, but also has a proven track record. This is a guy who's rushed for 1,100 yards. Then he gets on campus, and you start hearing, this kid's even bigger than, he's listed at 200 pounds, Utah State. If you're on his On3 profile, it's based on what he was like around high school, so it says like 180. So you may look at, Rasul Faison, he's 180 pounds, he's coming from Utah State. Is this just kind of a depth guy? Well, if you dive in, he's more like 215 pounds with a chance to get bigger. He's rushed for 1,100 yards. He's got a lot of collegiate experience. There's a lot to like. And so I'm not saying he's going to be Rocket Sanders, and in fact, they're two different types of players. But could he have a big impact? Maybe. I look at, Aaron Nolan, not going to have a huge impact this year because
hopefully not.
16. Yeah, right. You don't project him to have that. But could he, different type of situation, different than taking Robbie Ashford or Davis Bevel out of the portal. This is more of a depth and then a long-term play. It's a guy that Ohio State, who's about to play for the national championship, said, we like him as a possible quarterback of the future. And now he's on the roster for the Gamecocks. But then you start looking at some of the guys that, maybe they end up being depth pieces, or maybe they're kind of in between. They just might come in here and win a job. They might end up being a quality backup and a few different things in between. So I think with this class, it's very interesting looking back at last year. Guys like Kyle Kennard and Demetrius Knight, who ended up being huge gets. And Kennard had offers from Florida State and Missouri. Like, he was a pretty big portal target, but he wasn't a portal 5-star. He wasn't, holy cow, look at Kyle Kennard. This guy's going to end up, Carolina's signing the best defensive player in college football, or the best defensive lineman in college football. So there's always, some projection, and there's always, I think, some surprises in the transfer portal class where guys ultimately outplay what you think, or maybe don't quite have the impact on the other side that you thought that they would.
Yeah, I think you look at just taking Rocket, for example, Chris, like we as like the South Carolina community, we're a little bit more familiar with Rocket just because this was a high school target for Carolina. We've talked about how he was a guy Gamecock fans just kind of dreamed about getting him into the Garnet and Black finally, and so it obviously happened. But if you even look at the rankings, and I know transfer portal rankings can be a little all over the place, but Rocket, the number 43 guy overall in the portal, number 6 running back. You look at Faison, number 78 prospect in the transfer portal, number 8 running back. If you look at the rating itself, both 4-star guys. Faison still a little bit behind Rocket. The average there, 91.53. Rocket's 92.57. But just in terms of the ratings and the rankings, not that far off in terms of kind of that outsider's perspective on what South Carolina is getting in Faison. So you do have an interesting mix of what are sort of depth pieces and then guys where it's South Carolina saying, hey, maybe we're a little bit higher on this player than what the rankings say, or it is just, hey, we expect you to come in and potentially play a depth role. In terms of right off the bat, who among this group can come in and start potentially? I think, guys, you look at all the offensive linemen that come in, they're going to have at least an opportunity. That doesn't mean they are going to, but they're going to have an opportunity to start. You look at, obviously, we've spent 2 segments on Brandon Cisse in the defensive back room. We've gone into that, but he's going to have an opportunity. He's one of the highest rated guys you got in this portal class. I still go back to Justin Okoronkwo as being the guy in this group that I think can step right in and fulfill a huge need for South Carolina and potentially be a starting linebacker for Carolina this year. He's got to go do it. He's got to get in. He's got to actually produce on the field in practice. But if you're projecting, if you're looking at this group and saying, who is not a 4-star guy that can make a huge impact for South Carolina in 2025, he's one of maybe a few that I sort of pinpoint onto. Tyler is smirking at me.
It's the flawless pronunciation of his last name.
I mean, it was unbelievable. Like, just rolled right off.
Y'all notice there was no hesitation.
There was none.
Not at all. Full confidence.
Just nailed it.
God, that was good. You should just record that, and then every time we have to say the name, we'll just have Tyler play it.
It's actually a good idea. I might actually do that. Quickly, and this is something that's fluid. It's going to change a lot over the course of the offseason, but Carolina right now sitting at 18th in the team transfer portal rankings, halfway through January. And again, only at 13. There's a lot of schools out there that have a lot more guys that have come in so far via the portal. But again, you're talking about what is currently a top 20 class and one that you can continue to build on as you get later into the spring as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a class like I don't think anybody thought Carolina's going to have the number 1 portal recruiting class in the country, right? This is probably where you expected it to land because you knew that they were going to go after some bigger fish. But you're also going to get guys like, I like the way you put it, Wes, talking about Boaz Stanley from Troy, right? Who's just an extremely quiet I don't even know if the public knew he was in the portal. Like, it didn't really get reported, but yet South Carolina took him, and he's going to have every opportunity to really compete, at the center position. Again, maybe he's a depth guy. Maybe he gets into spring practice, summer preseason, and looks like the best guy. We'll have to see. But I think there was going to be that mix. And when you have kind of a mix like that, that means you're not necessarily the top-ranked class, but they have gotten several of their needs met. We talked last segment with Mark about that. You still have the spring portal window for 10 days. It'll probably end up falling kind of in the midst of South Carolina spring practice, which will make for interesting timing for more reasons than one. But you do have the opportunity to go out, and if you feel like you need to grab another guy or two, you can do that. But this is a big just recruiting class overall right now. You got 13 transfers. You got a pretty big high school class. You've got about 40 guys right now in this 2025 class.
Yeah, certainly a good job from the transfer portal class so far for Carolina. We'll continue to monitor it as the offseason goes along. Come back, wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. A quick make your case. Should Deion Sanders become the next coach of the Dallas Cowboys? That's next on your Tuesday here on The Game. Hey, welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West, Chris along with you on this Tuesday. Of course, big news around the sports board yesterday. The Dallas Cowboys moving on from Mike McCarthy as their head coach after he failed to reach the playoffs this past season and had a 1-3 mark in the postseason in his, 5 years there with the Cowboys, and rumors running rampant on who exactly Jerry Jones is going to go out and hire. And one name that people keep coming back to, no surprise, is Deion Sanders. They have had conversations, though Deion did express interest in staying in Colorado. But as we know, coaches can say things and then decide to change their mind after the fact. So quick impromptu as we close out today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Make your case. Oh, hold on. Got to get the sounder. One more time. Okay, sound's not working for some reason. Anyway,
You have to do it, Tyler.
quick make your case. Dun.
Yep.
For or against Deion Sanders being the coach for the Dallas Cowboys. Chris, you start.
Oh, I am fully for it. And easy. I was going to say, but we're not doing buy or sell. Let me break it down.
There, I got it to work.
Late,
there it
but
goes.
we did it. Okay. So I will try to make a case about why it could work.
Okay.
But let me just say first, I'm completely for it. I'm not invested in it at all. I'm not a Dallas Cowboys fan. Our guy, I found out yesterday, Wes, our guy Kevin Miller at Gamecock Central is a Dallas Cowboys fan.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll have to get his opinion on it. It matters more. But I'm just here for the entertainment. Like I'm curious, would it work? It would definitely be entertaining. You have you have Deion Sanders, you have Jerry Jones, you have Deion as a former Cowboy. You have, hey, Deion's done some good things at the college level at Colorado. Could he step up and have success at the NFL level as a head coach? I'm completely here for it. Like, just as an observer, I would love to see it. The case as to why it could work, I mean, if he puts together a good staff, yeah, it could work. I mean, we've seen it's very hard to predict in the NFL.
Sure.
I mean, even harder than college. We've seen a lot of really good coaches. You know, a coach will have success one year. You can take a team to the Super Bowl, and you're fired in 2 years if you slip. You know, you can have a good year and then not be retained. I mean, you see recycling of coaches, and why did they hire that coach? Seems like a weird hire. So I'm not going to pretend to be able to project how successful it would or wouldn't be, but I do think it could work. I wouldn't rule it out, and I would love to see it be entertaining.
Wes, your thoughts?
Yeah, and a lot of times that NFL success just comes down to, I'm not saying the coaching doesn't matter. It obviously does, but your ownership and your GM's got to give you a chance. Like, you got to have some talent is what I'm trying to say. So, my case, I'll make the case for him to stay at Colorado because even with NIL, a big part of your roster is what guys can you get interest from. And I think if he takes an NFL job, you lose the recruiting aspect. And right now, there's a huge value for prospects to want to go play for a Deion Sanders. I think he can prove that he can do it without Travis Hunter, prove he can do it without his sons. He actually has put together a foundation in terms of having his future quarterback, it appears, coming in as well. And so I'm excited to see if he can continue to build this thing at Colorado. I think he's just a better fit for the college game. It would be fun. It would be entertaining. Hard Knocks would be beating down the door to pick that as their destination for this offseason. But I think Deion Sanders is good for college football. I would like to see him stay in college football personally. And if I'm the Cowboys, man, if I'm any team with an opening, I'm going and getting who I wanted my Panthers to get, and that's Ben Johnson from the Lions.
I'm kind of with Wes. As entertaining as it would be to see Deion with the Cowboys and going back and forth with Jerry Jones and the reality show that could be, I think he's in a good place in Colorado. He proved so many of us wrong this past season because we didn't think they were going to make that big of a jump from year 1 to year 2. And remember, they were only a couple games away from being in contention for the college ball playoff by virtue of being in the Big 12 championship game. So I think he's in a good place. Like you said, he can prove he can have success without his 2 sons on the roster. And you go to Dallas, you're immediately going to be talked about, okay, can you win 12 games? Can you take him to the Super Bowl and all that kind of stuff? And I don't know if he wants to put those kind of expectations on his shoulders. Can he eventually get to the NFL? Sure, but I don't think this is the first job to jump into, especially as you still have so much to build out there at Colorado. Though, if he did, I'd be entertained by it the entire time and seeing what Jerry Jones would have to say and how those two would end up butting heads, because you know what's going to happen. Jerry Jones is a very meddling owner, and that's been the problem for so many years. Here's the thing, though. Deion Sanders is not a yes man. You know, Mike McCarthy, Jason Garrett were yes man that would do whatever Jerry Jones said. Deion would push back. And I think that's where this could get really interesting if he does end up taking the job, though I don't think he will, how that dynamic of those two plays out.
Acclaimed actor Jerry Jones. Did you see his clip in Landman?
So that was actually not bad.
Well, as others have pointed out,
good.
That was just him talking, just being himself. Do you have a Jerry Jones impression?
Not a good one.
I'll vet it off air.
We'll try it tomorrow. How about that? That'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Up next, halftime show. Myself, Terry Ford, here on the game.
Closing things out here on the show, and if you're hungry for lunch like I am, why don't you consider Firehouse Subs? You should. It's the best lunch, dinner, catering options, 15 convenient locations all around the Midlands. That's one of the things I love actually the most about Firehouse Subs is no matter where you are, you can be in Lexington, you can be in Irmo, you can be here downtown in Columbia where we are on the studio, you can be in the Northeast, and wherever you are, there's going to be a Firehouse